Oh, and is there a link I can put up on Facebook?
I hope so. How's everybody doing? Got any questions, any hellos, any words of encouragement? Holler at us. We're just getting set up here with David. Is it Avallone or Avallone?
It's Avaloni.
Avallone. Perfect.
Nice Italian name. There we go. Let me dismiss that. Okay, now I can see you.
All
Fantastic. Right. Hair's a little nuts, but, you know, not bad for quarantine.
So we got a little bit of everything, a little bit of something for everybody. Dave's drinking a White Russian out in LA. And of course, I'm a classic monster. So Comic Creators TV, we've been last week we had on Ethan Sachs. Ethan Sachs is a writer over at Marvel, and he's been doing Star Wars. He's been doing a real kick-ass job at doing that. He did Old Man Logan,
nice.
Excuse me, not Old Man Logan, Old Man Quill, and some other fun projects. So this week we've got on David Avallone, and David is mostly independent stuff. Let's see, Dynamite Comics with Vampirella, Twilight Zone, Doc Savage, Bettie Page. Let's see, the list goes on and on. Let's see, Swords of Blood, and for Kevin Eastman Studios, he writes Drawing Blood.
Yes.
So, David, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit more.
I'm from Jersey originally, moved out to LA 30 plus years ago to make films, and I did that I'm still working on films, but about 5-6 years ago I got an opportunity to jump into comics, and I did. I got a gig from Dynamite, and so that's the reason they've been my main publisher since then. They've been pretty loyal to me, so I've been loyal to them. And then about 3-4 years ago, I met Eastman at a convention, and we became close friends pretty quickly because he's the nicest guy in comics. Actually, that's not true. Stan Sakai is the nicest guy in comics. Kevin Eastman is the second nicest guy in comics. It's a very close thing. And he had this dream project he wanted to do called Drawing Blood, and he suggested that I write it with him, create it with him, and write the scripts. And we kickstarted that, and it was very successful. And we kickstarted Volume 2, which we're working on now, which is good because the rest of the comic industry is shut down. So that's sort of the work that I still have. I was in the middle of a miniseries for Dynamite when the shutdown hit. And I think that will still go forward because they already paid me to write 2 issues. But we're waiting to see when comics are going to be printed and sold again.
Yeah. And just for those who don't know, comic books have been halted or paused for right now. This is why we're doing the show, just to kind of connect creators with fans and readers in this time where we can't really get new books. So it's good to kind of step back a little bit and get to meet the people. But we don't know when comics are going to be coming back out. We're all kind of waiting in limbo, which can be a little nerve-wracking, especially as a creator, and even so much as, you know, these little local comic book stores. So, Dave, tell us a little bit about some of the film stuff. Let's talk about that.
Well, I started out just doing crew stuff. Funny thing, in 1989, I was working for a little music video company called Limelight, and I was a PA for them. And the music video end of that company was kind of horrible. It was kind of all a lot of cocaine, a lot of just not the best people in the world. So I quit right before they started production on their first movie, which was the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So it strikes Kevin and I as very funny that we probably would have met in 1989 instead of 2015.
Right.
if I had stuck with it and not been grossed out by the people I was working for. I was a grip and an electric lighting jobs. I worked 6 months on the first season of the Power Rangers, the very first season of that. And then I tried to move into a better direction and ended up writing for Saban. I wrote some episodes of VR Troopers, which was sort of the first Power Rangers-y spinoff. I edited movies for a long time, edited a lot of indie movies. I directed a karate movie called Kick of Death, which is about as good as it sounds. I think
sounds good to me.
Yeah, right? Lloyd Kaufman's Trauma Films ended up with it, and I kid him about that. You know Lloyd Kaufman, Trauma Films, The Toxic Avenger, all that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Here's a quick story about Lloyd Kaufman and why I love him. The first or second time I met him, I said, in a pickup from another low-budget company, you now own Kick of Death, which I wrote and directed in 1987. And without a moment's pause, Lloyd said to me, Kick of Death is the finest motion picture ever made. And it's very much not, but it's just very funny to me that he was just right there with, oh yeah, Kick of Death, that's the best movie I've ever seen in my life, which was funny. But I worked on a bunch of stuff, and then, yeah, in 2014, I showed an old script of mine to a friend who had contacts in the comic book industry, and she said, you know, you've been out of work a little bit. Let me see if I can find you some comic book writing work. And introduced me to Dynamite's editor-in-chief, Joe Rybant, and we hit it off, and he said, let me see if I can find you something. So that was very, very nice. And worth mentioning, you mentioned the last guest you had on had written some Star Wars stuff. The first professional writing gig I ever had in 1988, when there were no Star Wars movies, no comic books currently being published, any of that. There was a role-playing game company called West End Games that had the Star Wars license. And I wrote Star Wars short stories for one of their game manuals.
Huh.
I killed IG-88. I'm very proud of that. I wrote a short story in which Boba Fett kills IG-88. And if you look in Wikipedia or whatever, there's one entry that says IG-88 killed in orbit over Tatooine by Boba Fett. And I'm like, that's me. That's my tiny, teeny, tiny contribution to George's epic saga. And I'm very proud of that. But yeah, so I wrote Legendary Vampirella first, which was a spinoff from a thing that Bill Willingham had done. He created a whole universe called Legendary using all of the Dynamite characters in a steampunk setting. So I wrote Steampunk Vampirella, which was a lot of fun. And then did the Twilight Zone The Shadow, which was an interesting mashup between those two properties. And then Doc Savage, Ring of Fire, which is Doc Savage thing. And then I hit this niche of turning sex symbols into comic book heroes with first Bettie Page. And I've written 25 issues of Bettie Page at this point. Because Dynamite, because everybody loves new number ones now.
Yeah.
The last series wrapped up at issue 10, but it's really issue 25 because there was an 8-issue series, a 5-issue series, then a 10-issue series, then 2 Halloween specials and all that. And then Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, was the one that came along after that. And great fun writing her.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that number one because, man, we talk about it a lot. There's always, I don't know if it's good or bad for little guys like us because we got to have the number one.
Right.
But we order so far ahead of time. I don't know if people realize this. We're ordering 3 months ahead of time. And so you get a book, you got to have number one. And then, of course, you had number one. So you got to get number 2, number 3. And you're 3 months out before you realize people don't like the book anymore or they want a new number one. You know, there's a new number one out. And so
it's a tricky business model. And it, you know this, but I don't know if all your audience does. You know, Diamond took over, has a giant monopoly on comic book shop distribution since the 90s. It's not a great model. And
it's actually old. It's very archaic and old in its approach, but go.
And it's, I mean, and honestly should be illegal. It is a monopoly.
Yeah.
There is no competition in the Diamond verse. And, you know, we did, after the first Kickstarter, we did put that comic through previews and through the Diamond system. So I know all about the 4-month window between you ordering it and it showing up in your shop.
Right.
And I'm a big believer in, and I preach this to other comic book creators all the time, in retail outreach, in having a relationship with comic book stores, and not just the one down the street from you.
Right.
My life has gotten used to this. When we travel anywhere in the country, whether it's for a con or not, there's at least one afternoon where I do Google Maps, comic book store. The closest comic book store is store XYZ. I go, I see if they have any of my stuff on the shelves. If they do, I sign it and, you know, shake a hand and say, this is what I got coming out soon. Because basically your entire career rests on the guy behind the counter or the woman behind the counter saying, oh my God, this new Avaloni thing is fantastic. You got to read it. That's it. That's the only reason. I mean, yeah, a nice cover is great. If people are already your fans and they're following you, it's great. But the person behind the counter, when the customer says, what's new, what's good, you want them to say, oh, Bettie Page Unbound is on issue 4. It's fantastic. You should pick it up, you know.
Right.
That's the whole thing.
I agree with that 100%, 1,000%, really. You know, what I'm always telling my guys here in the shop is make sure you're reading stuff so you can tell people what you like.
Yep.
You know, and I can tell you right now, we sell more issues of the things that I read.
Of course.
Of it. I love Die. I'm reading Die. I don't know if you've heard of Die. Really great book. I'm reading that. I can't keep it on the shelf. I read Red Hood, of all things. We can't keep them on the shelf. That new Doom that just came out, another one that we can't keep on the shelf. It's because I'm excited about it. I can talk about it eloquently. And another thing is if we know the guests, we know the people are coming in, we know what kind of stuff they like, and we're able to easily recommend things that fall within the things that you know.
I mean, absolutely, because the last thing you want to do, whether you like a book or not, you got to know if it's appropriate for the reader. Right. You don't go to someone who's reading, you know, Captain America and go, you know what you're going to love absolutely 100% is Chew. Right. It's like, maybe, you know, that's very different sensibility. It's a very different sense of humor, you know, and they might love it if they also like that, but they might also go, what is this disgusting nonsense you want me to read? And I love Chew. Chew is great. That's sort of my point, though. All sorts of great books that not everybody is going to enjoy. Right. So you have to know what their thing is and what they really like.
For sure. And it's always easier. And I think there's a saying somewhere, something like, if all things are fair, I'd still rather do business with people that I know. And even if it's not fair, I'd rather do business with people I know.
Absolutely. So, and that's
a personal connection with people.
Yeah.
I'm going to recommend your stuff on a book that's maybe equal pace in another publisher. I'm going to recommend yours because I have this connection with you now, you know.
Absolutely. And that's that I talk a lot about networking because I think it's a greatly misunderstood thing. And what people misunderstand about it is they approach it completely from a dollar signs in your eyes kind of way. When it goes like this, everybody would rather work with their friends. So networking isn't about you have value to me, you can do something for me, I can maybe do something for you. Network is about let's be friends, and at some point down the road, I hope we get a chance to work together. But friends first. You know, add value to my life, I will add value to your life. And if we gel well together, it never occurred to me in a trillion years when I was introduced to Kevin Eastman that he would ask me to collaborate with him on something. So probably unlike a lot of comic creators that meet Kevin Eastman, I had no agenda. I was like, oh, it's the Ninja Turtles guy. How great. I read that comic in the 80s. We can talk about that. And the first thing that we bonded over is in our mutual childhoods, we both liked World War II comics. In the 1970s, we were both reading Bob Kanigher, Russ Heath, Joe Kubert, World War II comics. So we talked about that for an hour. You know, no turtles or mutants were mentioned at any point.
Right.
Because he's talked about the Ninja Turtles his whole adult life. He doesn't need to have another conversation about how awesome he is.
Yeah.
You talk to people about what they're interested in and what they like.
Right.
That's how you make friends. And if you approach going to cons and going to panels and meeting people, if you have an interest in the industry, in any industry, it's about being friends. And yeah, we'd all like to work with our friends. Right. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a very natural thing to want to work with your friends, you know?
So, Dynamite, let's talk Dynamite since that's your most recent stuff. I love it. I love how robust and colorful their covers are always. I think there's something very unique. I don't know what they do. It might be a different stock, a card stock on the cover or something. You might have some insight into that, but they do something just a little different that really makes them stand out.
I can't say from a printing standpoint, but they have a really great roster of cover artists. Mm-hmm. And there's an artist, a Canadian artist named Scott Chandler. Even though I am a humble comic book writer who doesn't make a ton of money, I've bought like 5 of his covers for my Bettie Page comics because they're so amazing that I just have to own them. I did a thing called Bettie Page Unbound, and it was Bettie Page traveling to a bunch of alternate dimensions.
Yeah.
Crazy story. And my joke title for it was Crisis on Infinite Betties. And Scott did a cover that was George Perez's Crisis on Infinite Earth's cover for #1, but they're all Bettie Page. So great. I had to own that. It's such a beautiful piece. But yeah, they do a lot of eye-catching stuff, and they get great artists along. The best thing for me about Dynamite, and I don't think it's any secret that, you know, they're a relatively small publisher. They're certainly not the highest paying shop in the world, but I have complete creative freedom over there, which is wild. The first script of my very first comic book, I handed in, and there was dead silence. And I thought, you know, being someone who's used to being a writer in Hollywood, I went, well, that's it. It's over. They hated it. I'm never going to work again. And I was waiting for notes. And I called up a fellow comics writer who works for them. And I said, well, I guess Joe hated it. I didn't hear anything. And he's like, brother, you're done. They're not... There will be no notes. You're done. You're finished. They're drawing it right now as we speak. So I got more proactive and said, really? I'd like to see the pages. I'd like to be involved. And I have had great relationships with 99% of the artists I've worked with in my career. Dave Acosta, who's drawn most of the stuff, who drew Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, is a great creative partner. He instant messages me every layout, every pencil, every ink as he finishes them. And 99% of the time I say, fantastic. And 1% of the time I say, oh, his arm should be down. Or, oh, she's going to need a hat in the next. I look ahead in the script and you remember there's a hat there. Oh, yeah, right. So very, very small stuff. And I've asked for, it's interesting as someone who edited and directed and produced films, the post-production process. You know, you write the script. I'm sure there are writers in comics who then walk away and are very surprised with what the comic looks like when it comes out. I'm not saying I micromanage, but I see everything, and I try my damnedest to never make someone redraw a page. I try to make sure the script is right and clear, and they don't need additional instructions. Every once in a while, something slips through, and you have to clear and correct. And also, sometimes it's great to let them have freedom. Julius Oda, who I worked with on Bettie Page, is very good with a lot of things, and he's very good with action. And I usually give artists a lot of freedom in action sequences, because what may work in my mind, you try to draw it, it may not be as good. And after the first couple of times I had written a full action sequence and Julius had drawn it really beautiful and added things to it, I started doing 4 panels of a judo fight. You do what you want, you know, like kick, throw, whatever. I don't particularly care. She wins in the end. That's all I need. And I'll see it, and I'll, you know, after the inks are done, I always do one more dialogue pass, because every once in a while you see something in the images that cries out for a different line of dialogue or a joke. Right. There's a scene, the third, fourth issue of Vampirella. There's a crew of vampire hunters going to kill Vampirella, Van Helsing and his son, and they've got bandoliers with wooden stakes in them. The bad guys in the series who have hired the vampire hunters have an army of these stormtrooper dudes who have disintegrator rifles. And there's supposed to be a silent panel of the vampire hunt crew standing around. But the artist, David Thomas Cabrera, drew one of the stormtroopers standing right next to Van Helsing with his rifle in his hand, just kind of looking at him with his head cocked. And it was just something funny about the way the guy's head was cocked. And I added the stormtrooper saying, I can show you how to use one of these disintegrator rifles if you like. Just the idea of like wooden stakes, really? Dude, I have a matter disintegrator right here. Like, what do you want with a wooden stake? And Van Helsing says, I'm good. But like, that was supposed to be a silent panel, but the way it was drawn, I was just like, there's an interaction happening here that calls out for someone to say something rather than just be a silent moment. So that comes up a bunch, and you know, it makes the comic better. And with Eastman, Drawing Blood is about a comic creator like Eastman, who created a thing like the Ninja Turtles, which is the radically rearranged Ronin Ragdolls. They're 3 cats named after Japanese animation directors. They fight crime. It's very goofy stuff. But I was writing the script.
This has been my whole life.
Yeah, right?
I need this so bad in my life.
Well, that's on Comixology if you don't have it. Anyway, Kevin, one of the nicest compliments I've ever been paid. I handed in the outline, and Kevin said, "You know what? I'm going to do the layouts on this." It was going to all be drawn by Troy Little, and he said, "I think I want to do the layouts." And I said, "Great." And then I sat down to write it, and when I got to the first fight scene, I thought, "Are you really going to dictate to Kevin Eastman what should happen in a scene with funny animals fighting ninjas? Really?
Probably the authority on that.
Really something you're going to dictate to Kevin?" So I called him up and I said, "Kevin, I kind of want to Stan Lee all the fight sequences in this thing and just say, fight sequence, 6 pages, go nuts." You know, and he did. And he was perfectly happy with that. And in the proud tradition of Stan Lee, I came along later and added the quips and the sound effects and the dialogue and all that. But, you know, all I had to tell him was, at the end, this has happened, and this has happened.
Right.
That's it. Draw whatever you want. And that was very sad. Another thing about that is the average comic book page, as I'm sure you've noticed over the years, 4 to 6 panels.
Right.
You really don't want to ask the artist for a lot more than that. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but the really genius creators who are cartoonists, who write and draw, Frank Miller, Howard Chaykin, Eastman, those guys will do a 25-panel page easy, like without raising a sweat, because they're in charge. They don't care. And they'll, draw little tiny things, whatever. I didn't want to get into the habit of trying to write to Kevin's strengths and end up handing some poor slob who's not Kevin Eastman a 20-panel page in a script. I would be killed. I would be, drawn and quartered, and I would deserve it for doing that. So I let Kevin do his 10, 15, 20-panel pages, and they're fantastic, and, I didn't have to pick up any bad habits.
We got some questions here.
Great.
My favorite one is, "I love y'all, Pop Rock." Love you too, brother. Let's see. Any freelance tips?
The overall freelance tip is always make your deadlines. Always make your deadlines. Be kind. The worst cliche ever committed upon young aspiring artists is the idea that talent makes you an asshole and it gives you an excuse to be one. Like I said, Kevin Eastman's the nicest guy in comics.
I told this story. I told the story last time about Stan Lee. First time I ever met him, I don't know, 20 years ago at Comic-Con in Toronto, you know, Fan Expo, Toronto. The line was, it was 3,000 people waiting to get in. He walked by every single he could have cut straight through, went through the back door, anything. Walked by every single person, high-fived, took pictures. It was amazing. I mean, yeah. Who does that? You know, like. Yeah.
Well, you know
that's not becoming a friend thing too. When you become.
It is, and it's related to my thing of going to local comic book shops and meeting the owner and shaking. I'd get a picture, I'd put it on Instagram, all that, and that comes back 1,000-fold to you, and you get a fan for life. I also go on Instagram, especially when I'm writing for a licensed character, and I look for the hashtag. Like I look at the Bettie Page hashtag and the Elvira hashtag, particularly on weeks that I have a comic out. And 1 out of 20 posts is someone holding the comic. And I comment. I say, hey, thanks for reading.
Yeah.
And I'm not Stan Lee. I'm not Kevin Eastman. I am new. I don't have a lot of fans, whatever. Their minds are blown that the guy who wrote the comic they liked commented on their thing.
Yeah.
A fan last night on Instagram posted a picture of my Elvira book. And I said, oh, you should read Bettie Page left. And she said, next. And she said, I have 9 issues of Bettie Page Unbound. My comic book store couldn't get number 4. And I said, oh, PayPal me $10 and I'll sign one and throw it in the mail for you. She PayPal'd me $25 and said, keep the change. And I don't even know what to do with that kindness.
Yeah.
But clearly she was thrilled that 1, I noticed it on Instagram, 2, I replied, and 3, I said, yeah, sure, I got a comp here somewhere. I'll throw it in an envelope for you. You know, but that gets you a fan for life.
Right.
And those are the people that nominate you for awards. Those are the people that buy everything that you work on. And hopefully they're enjoying it.
Yeah, I want to assume somebody told me one time that you know, one of the biggest things you can do in acting, modeling, and I would assume this art form too well is like you said, meet your deadline. Show up on time, do what you're supposed to do, right?
Right.
And do it well. And so yeah, I would say, especially, you know, freelancing. I know that I've had some freelance opportunities in the past, not for this, but other avenues in life. And it's just either under promising and over performing, or just do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it.
Do what you say you're going to do. Don't overextend yourself. I had a year where, when I was transitioning sort of away from filmmaking and sort of into comics full time, I agreed to cut 1 last feature film, and I had a full slate. I had like 3 monthly comics at the same time. And it was brutal, and I did not sleep very well. And I kind of promised never to do that to myself again, but I did. The work got done. It got into people's hands. You know, I made it through, and I don't have to do that again, hopefully. The other freelancer tip I would give is there's another piece of mythology that I agree with, is to, you know, master one thing completely and be the 100%. It's the only thing you do. Be known for that thing. I'm a believer in the job mosaic. Do as many things as you can do well. Have alternatives.
Right.
Find other ways to make money, because the thing that you want to do the most will not always be the thing that makes you the most money. I wanted to direct films, and the first film directing job I got was out of being a writer, and the second film directing job I got was out of being an editor. And most of the acting jobs I've gotten have been not out of auditioning for a role, but out of being someone the director knew from somewhere else in some other capacity. And it's, I mean, an irony, I think I can talk about this. I tried for years to get to be a studio, you know, big studio writer on big studio projects. Never really worked out for me that way. Did a lot of free work and it never paid off. When I'd been doing nothing but comic books for about a year, an old friend of mine reached out to me and said, Jill Soloway, who's another old friend of mine, is looking for comic book people. Jill Soloway's the creator of the Amazon show Transparent, a couple of other things.
Yeah, good show.
And I said, well, tell Jill I'm comic book people now, so she should have a meeting with me. And they brought me in for the meeting, and I got on the job, and I've been part of the development team for the new Red Sonja movie. Not because of my 30 years of film experience, but because of my 3 years of comic book writing experience.
Right.
And that's a little ridiculous that it took writing comic books to get a good Hollywood job, but you never know.
Yeah.
Which is the other thing. You never know. So
I think it's important to be able to speak the language of the people around you too. We talk about this a lot in my other business, is this language, you know, right? That I don't know your language, right? But like there's a language you speak with other guys in your industry. So you're speaking efficiently, quickly. Like if you walk into a kitchen, 86, it's out, right? You know, this is on the fly, which means now, reggae, regular. Or in the hospital, you know, there's codes. They speak that language, and if you can't understand that language, right? Yeah. Then how do you effectively communicate with those people? So I could only imagine the writer's language is going to be different from the guy who's drawing, and being able to understand those languages and be able to communicate effectively and efficiently across those lines is going to be important.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it is, I mean, and you can use shorthands with people who have similar backgrounds to you. The best example I can think of that, I was producing a movie and there was a MacGuffin. You know, we know what a MacGuffin is, the Maltese Falcon, the Ark of the Covenant, the Death Star plans, the thing everyone's chasing everybody for. And I was talking to the composer about it having a theme in our movie. And I said, but we don't want it to be ridiculous. We don't want it to be like a Cross of Coronado thing. And he laughed because he knows that in John Williams' score for The Last Crusade, every time you see the Cross of Coronado, Williams plays the same little theme to a comical degree. like he's got a button that he hits every time someone holds it up. And the composer was as familiar with that movie and that score as I am. So he went, absolutely, not the Cross of Coronado thing. I get it. So little things like that, the more you're familiar with the language of comics and the history of comics, you can say like this, not like that.
Right. Hey, Sal, I just want to say hi. Sal just jumped on. So Sal Otero has done some work for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. He's done some covers and stuff. Good dude.
Great.
Manchester. Sal?
For the IDW run?
Yeah, right. It was IDW, right, Sal?
See if Sal replies.
I'll jump in. So, cool. I want to ask you, because personally, like I said, hey, this is my show, right? Totally. Tell me more about that Twilight Zone Phantom thing. I'm really interested.
The Twilight Zone, the Shadow thing.
Or Shadow, I'm sorry.
It was a really challenging assignment because when I started to break it down, you know, what's the Twilight Zone? The Twilight Zone is an average person who has a problem in their life, a thing they're blind to, a thing they're wrong about. The Twilight Zone kind of chews them up, teaches them a lesson, and spits them out. And if they're a good person, maybe they get spit out better. If they're a bad person, maybe they're in hell for the rest of their life. That's not always the formula. But when I was working on it, it struck me that the Shadow is just the Twilight Zone as a person.
All day.
Yeah. He encounters people. He tests them. and they fail or succeed, and he judges them pretty harshly if they fail. So what they wanted, what CBS, who owns the Twilight Zone license, wanted, is they wanted a Twilight Zone thing to happen to the Shadow. So the first question you got to ask yourself is, what does the Shadow need to learn? He's the master. He can see into men's souls. He knows if you're good or evil. And I decided that the thing the Shadow needed to learn was mercy. Because he doesn't have any. He doesn't display mercy. He's merciless. And the opening scene of it, and this was kind of interesting, I said it in 1939, and in the opening scene, he busts up an American Nazi rally. Interesting aside.
The Nazis, was he?
What's that?
He didn't show sympathy to you.
Oh, no.
Bunch of Nazi folks.
But he blew up a Nazi encampment in Long Island. And by the way, based on a real place, the research, look up Camp Siegfried. The place actually existed. But there's a crowd listening to a guy give a speech, and he blows up their loudspeaker, and they all start shooting at him, and he starts firing into the crowd. Now, because he's the Shadow, he's only hitting the people that are firing back at him. But there are women holding babies, there are old men, there's a whole thing. And later, Margot Lane says to him, "You were firing into a crowd with women and children and old men." And he's like, and she says, "You could have hit anybody." And he goes, I'm the Shadow. I couldn't hit anybody. And then there's an explosion. He gets knocked unconscious. And for the next 4 issues, he lives in another person's skin. And in the first issue, he actually, this is kind of complicated, but he wakes up and he's Lamont Cranston, the guy who the Shadow sometimes pretends to be. In the Shadow is, in the radio show, it's like Batman, where Lamont Cranston is the Shadow. In the pulp magazines, Lamont Cranston is some rich guy that he sort of resembles. And when he wants to go among high society, he literally shows up at Bruce Wayne's house and says, "You're staying home. I'm borrowing your tuxedo and your girlfriend and going to this party." And Lamont is like, "Okay, man, just don't hurt me." So he sees himself through Lamont's eyes as this sort of psychopath that controls his life.
Right.
And in the second issue, I went super meta, and he wakes up and he's Orson Welles about to record a Shadow radio show.
Oh,
so he sees a world in which he's a fictional character. And then in the third issue, he's the guy writing the first Shadow novel for a pulp magazine. It's a nutty series, but I'm very proud of it. I think it came out great. Yeah. And that was also with Dave Acosta. That was our first big series together.
Very cool.
Thanks.
Sale says he did do the.
Thanks, Joe. By the way, Joe Stock Slater says he read the Twilight Zone Shadow comics. Thanks, sir. Oh, and thanks, Sal, for seeing the Kickstarter. I'm friends with most of the IDW crew that has worked on those books. Tom Waltz, I think, did an amazing job with those 100 issues. That's an achievement. Do 100 unbroken issues.
Yeah, no number ones.
Yeah.
Dude,
no constant restarts.
How about Splinter is the head of the Foot Clan? Spoiler, by the way.
No, that was great stuff.
Like, this is awesome. This is
and
everybody, if you meet the turtles, beat them up, don't kill them.
And the slow rollout of Jenica was genius. I thought.
Yeah. Something
that the fans could have just absolutely hated, like they did when Saban did the TV series and had the female turtle and did a shoddy job with it. I feel like that was masterfully done. Introducing her as a human first, giving her a variation of the She-Hulk's origin with the blood transfusion and all that. I was very impressed with that. Yeah.
I haven't read it yet. It's in my pile. I've got a pile this big that I'm working through during this quarantine. It's definitely on my list. I've been reading a lot of Yosaki Ojimbo. I love the simplicity in that, and I love those worlds.
I'll tell you a funny story about that, because Stan did a cover for us.
Oh, did he?
He did a Ragdolls variant cover for us of the Ragdolls with Usagi Yojimbo. And I have some manners. I don't meet people and ask them for favors as literally the first words out of my mouth. Stan and Kevin were doing a signing together at an IDW booth, I think. It was like 3 years ago. And we were prepping the Ragdolls and Drawing Blood. And I come up at the end of the signing, and Kevin is like, "Oh, Stan, this is my buddy Dave. We're doing this thing together." And I put out my hand to shake Stan Sakai's hand. And literally the first words out of my mouth are, "Would you do a cover for us?" You know, I was mesmerized by Stan. And went, could I get a cover from you? And he did. Yeah. And the great thing is, I think we mentioned to him in passing that the comic was coming out, and he emailed us back and said, "So do you want Usagi Yojimbo on the cover, or you just want me to draw the Ragdolls?" And we said, "No, put Usagi Yojimbo with the Ragdolls. That'll be more fun." And he just sent us the art and never asked to be paid, never, just like an envelope showed up with the original art, and he emailed us a high-res copy of it, and such an absolute gentleman. And that Usagi Yojimbo, the new run is really great.
Cool. Well, I try to keep these down to about a half an hour. Is there any last fun story, something cool, something you're working on, any piece of advice, some last bit of something?
Final, I mean, the best advice to everyone ever about everything is be kind. And that works in any industry, but particularly in this one. It's a really, comic books, movies is a small world, television is a small world, comic books is a microscopic world. Everyone hears about the time you were an asshole, so do your best to not be an asshole. Aside from that, the next thing I have coming out will be the second volume of the Drawing Blood Kickstarter. I'm on the 7th issue, which means I got 1.5 left to write for that. There's a new double-sized Ragdolls adventure, a 40-page Ragdolls adventure coming. One of the things about the Ragdolls is they allow us to comment on the history of comic books because they are supposedly created in 1991. And the one thing we've released so far is the 1991 origin issue. And Troy Little came to Kevin and I when we said we were going to do another Ragdolls. He said, "I'd rather not ink Kevin again because Kevin's layouts are super detailed." He said, "I'd rather work in a style closer to my own." And his suggestion for how to do a Ragdolls comic that was even more cartoony, even more exaggerated, was we're framing it as, this is the 90s comic book, the late 90s comic book that went along with the Nickelodeon cartoon show for kids. So it's the Ragdolls Animated Adventures Summer Special or whatever. And that's all done and drawn, and it's gorgeous, and I can't wait for it to get out. And that all of this stuff will come to the Kickstarter supporters first, but then it'll be another trade and another Ragdolls comic in the Diamond system, if the Diamond system exists in 3 months. And like everyone else, I'm doing a lot of these interviews. I'm doing a lot of, there's a digital Comic-Con coming up called Mainframe that I'm doing a couple of panels for. There's a free comic book day. There's a thing called Alt Free Comic Book Day, which you can look up. And a friend of mine two friends of mine, Russell Nolte and Neo Edmond, both great comic book creators, came up with, and it's running the weekend that was supposed to be Free Comic Book Day, and we'll be giving away the digital first issue of Drawing Blood during that.
Share all that stuff with me, and I'll share that to our social media. So guys, look out for that stuff in the future. Hey, man, it was a pleasure having you on.
It was great.
I can't wait. I'm like, now I've got a list of things I got to catch up on. Great. Very cool.
And where are you? You're in Rochester?
Yeah, I'm in upstate Rochester, New York.
Great. I went to college in Bard near Kingston, you know, which is upstate New York. If you're not from New York State, right. If you're from New York State, it's nowhere near upstate New York.
It's weird, the Western New York, upstate New York thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think upstate makes it sound hard.
Yeah.
Sound tough.
Yeah, those winters, man.
Yeah. It's good. We'll have to have you up. We actually have here is the Strong Museum, which is the National Toy Hall of Fame.
Oh, fun.
And they've just done a $60 million expansion. And wow. We actually throw a con here called Super City. And what we do is, as opposed to everybody gathering in a convention center, we break out, and it's literally in the streets. It's all over town. We have tents set up, and we have different things happening in movie theaters. We played video games on the dome of the planetarium.
Nice.
We showed cartoons and old movies at the little art house theater we have. So we have it's really, and the approach is really to have access to people who normally wouldn't get access to Comic-Cons, i.e. low-income families, people who really need heroes and don't get access because they're boxed out by price. So we try to provide a free alternative. We really think it could be something big. Of course, this year we had to shift a little bit, but we've got some fun ideas coming up. But again, brother, really appreciate having you on. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Jason. It was great.
And we look forward to seeing stuff you got coming out in the future, okay?
Thanks, man.
All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.